The Brutally Speaking podcast is proudly sponsored by Starving Artist Brewing. Starving Artist Brewing may be a small speck on Michigan's beer map, but they say big things come in small packages. A brewery who really puts their money where their mouth is, supporting underground artists far and wide. Making delicious beers with the simple belief that you should judge beer, not people. Brutally Speaking podcast is proudly sponsored by Rockabilia.com. With over 500,000 officially licensed items in their online store, you're guaranteed to find something you need. Use our code BRUTALLY and get 10% off your total purchase order. Now on to the show.
People say you have to have a lot of passion for what you're doing. This rings true because it's so hard that if you don't, any rational person would give up. It's really hard. And you have to do it over a sustained period of time. So if you don't love it, and if you're not having fun doing it, you're gonna give
up. What's up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of the Brutally Speaking podcast. I am your host, John, and this episode's guest is Steven from Chelsea Grin. This was a lot of fun, a really lengthy chat, so I'm going to try to keep this intro short. But, it's been interesting, getting some of the new music that's been coming out in kind of the more deathcore or whatever genre you want to call it. It's been interesting because, and I hate to say, and it's nothing to provoke, any of the fans of this band or the other band, because I understand there is some things between the two bands, obviously. But, it's been interesting to see the viralness of bands like Lorna Shore with To the Hellfire and to see, the moment with Kubla Khan and how there is a greater emphasis on people checking out extreme music for the first time. I think even if you go to what Bring Me the Horizon has done, having Danny Filth on a couple of songs, apparently Danny Filth and Ed Sheeran apparently working on something. I don't know if it's going to be Cradle of Filth related or if it's going to be Cradle of Filth on an Ed Sheeran song, but you're starting to see extreme music kind of becoming more mainstream. And to see this moment that the music genre is having is really interesting, and it really makes me wonder how much further can you push the extremities of the genre, and how much further can it be elevated to a more mainstream level. Obviously, it's not going to be something where for the next 20 years we're going to have brutal crushing metal on the top 100 charts or anything like that, but it is becoming something that I think the stigma of it to a degree is not as extreme maybe as one would have thought, like, oh, these connections could never happen. You'll never see these types of bands or this types of songs on TV or in mainstream media. And I honestly feel like it's such a wild time right now to see all this. And it's really got me interested to see who it will inspire moving forward, what the bands that are willing to take the risks for high rewards, what will happen to them. And it's just exciting. And it's what makes, doing a podcast and talking to musicians and, being a fan of music. It's the fun part of all this is just kind of being like, what's going to happen? Where are things going to go? I don't know. But it's fun to talk to people and see what they think and kind of pick their brains. So without further ado, this is my conversation with Steven, and I'll talk to you all on the other side of it. It's kind of funny. A lot of bands, I think in this day and age, I've talked a lot with music fans, friends of mine and so forth, and even people on the show. And we constantly talk about the evolution of the music industry and where it's going and where it's at currently. And is it better to put out singles versus putting out EPs, full length, so on and so forth. And there has been this thought from talking to some people where they're like, I don't understand why a band maybe just doesn't record, because everyone's constantly writing typically, like whether you're just compiling riffs or stockpiling vocal ideas or whatever, everyone's always kind of writing something. And so the concept that a lot of us have kind of come to is like, why don't bands just write a batch of songs and instead of putting on a record, just drop them intermittently over the course of time? Because with these 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 months in some instance rollouts, you know, you're kind of already forgotten about by the time the record comes out. I was actually just talking to someone that worked for the company that's used to work for like the PR company that hosts the media links for someone like myself to hear the records before they come out. And he was like, do people care about like physical media anymore? And he was comparing like this last week's Billboard numbers. And he's like, dude, like We Came as Romans didn't like sell more than blank. This band didn't sell more than blank. This band didn't sell more than blank. He's like, do people even care? And I go, I don't know. Is it the fact that people are just forget about a release by the time they actually come out, or what do you think it is? And I actually had commented about your guys' album because I feel like it's what a lot of us have been saying maybe that you should do. Just record a bunch of shit and then just release it. Like you have one half or one half of this double album, and you could have just been like, fuck it. Like we'll get to the other one when we get to it, or not even mention that there's another one. And then boom, 2023 comes. Hey, by the way, we already recorded this other one, had been sitting on it for a while. This was the plan all along. And now you're surprised and you're still in that conversation of people, you know what? I think the next one's coming out November. So December, January, February, March. So you're looking at 4 months where tentatively people will have quote unquote forgotten about the record. And then now you have another one and you're back in everyone's minds touring and so forth. How has it been for you guys to tackle putting out a double LP? Sorry, that was a very long-winded first question.
No. I mean, it's all definitely food for thought that I think a lot of people in the industry are sort of battling through right now. It's been a really, really crazy process. I mean, I think people, you know, it's been 4 years since we've put out a record. So that wasn't because we wanted to wait 4 years. That's because we had this huge task to surmount, you know, and we decided, you know, a couple of years ago when we were in the studio actually recording the albums, you know, we were in there and, you know, there was no like plan when we got to the studio to do 2 albums. We just got there and we were working with the producer, Zach Jones. And, you know, I had brought in like 30 something ideas for the record, you know, and usually there's a narrowing down process, like a red, yellow, green light process that we go through. And we realized a couple weeks into the studio, we were like, damn, we have a lot of material that we feel like should see the light of day and shouldn't just go into the boneyard. So we decided sort of last minute, you know, not entirely the last minute, but the second to last minute, we were like, all right, we're just going to do 2. Might as well give them 2. And then that turned into this whole process of like, okay, well, how do we plan to do 2? And at first, you know, there were all these chats about, you know, maybe doing 1 and then like you were sort of saying, not saying anything and then dropping the second one. That presented an interesting dilemma because it had, like I said, been 4 years since our last record and people were really chomping at the bit. Like by the time we actually announced the records were out or were coming out, people were honestly just being like aggressive in the comments. And we were like, okay, we can't just put out an 8-song album and expect people to like be cool with it. You know, we felt like if we came out of this with 8 songs and didn't, you know, mention there would be another 8, that people would have been freaking out. They would have been like, there would have been 4 months of people being like, well, screw Chelsea Grin. It's been 4 years and we get 8 songs. Like, what's this all about? Like, what have they been doing? So that sort of took off the surprise second album option from the table. And then, you know, there's all the debate of, like you were saying, do we just release singles? Do we like kind of prolong this and stay in people's minds more regularly? But, you know, that's never really been our style as a band. And for us, I think the reason a lot of bands still do albums is because the message people are trying to convey doesn't happen single by single. It happens, you know, under the umbrella of one big record. You know, the record is supposed to be a journey. Not that our albums or every album is conceptual or has to be heard in one sitting for like thematic purposes. But just the point we were trying to get across was only going to be done through an album or 2 albums. So there was really a lot to consider. And I could honestly go on forever about it. Like, we spent 4 years just stressing about getting this album done. And so I've got 4 years worth of pent up processing and stress going on that I could just unleash. But there was quite a bit to consider, especially in this day and age. Even since we released our last record, a lot has changed in the playing field. And it wasn't an easy decision to do 2 records. It wasn't an easy decision to do full records at all. But it's just sort of our style. We wanted to stay true to ourselves, and we just had a lot of material that we felt like was worth hearing, juxtaposed with one another. We just kind of wanted to stick to our guns and be like, here, you know what? You're getting a whole bunch of music in 2 big chunks.
Well, I think there's a couple of things to pick apart there. It's interesting that even you as the creatives feel this thing of like, well, if we only put out 8 songs after 4 years, like, people would be pissed because they've been waiting. And it's like, but what if those are like, you spent those 4 years and that was like the culmination of those 4 years was coming up with those 8 songs and ensuring that they're the best songs that they could be, instead of going, we got 8 really good ones. And I'm not saying like the other 8 aren't, but I'm saying like, if you're looking at it like, all right, we have 16, we could put out 8 and 8, do kind of this concept. But if you're kind of thinking that way, it's like, what if you're like mentally, you were like, these 8 are really great and the other ones are pretty good. You could probably spend more time and maybe get them to the same place that the 8 are, these original 8. But I think it's kind of weird that to hear even you guys are thinking like, if we just put out 8, people are going to be so pissed at us. Like it's interesting to hear that. Usually the sentiment is we don't write for the fans. We write for ourselves. We write what we want to hear. We do all this stuff. But it is interesting to start hearing bands, I think, be more honest and real about the process and just understanding like, we could have put out 8, but man, people would have been bummed.
Yeah, I mean, you have to consider the fans because, I mean, it's a tale as old as time. It's a total cliche here, but like, if they're not buying, listening to, or just, intaking the music in some form or another, then you're not succeeding as a business. And it's not like we were like, oh, if we only put out 8 shit, we gotta, oh wait, can I curse?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
It wasn't like, dang, we need to come up with another 8 songs. Like we felt there were 16 songs that were so strong that they needed to see. Right. They needed to be heard. So it's not like there's like a B-side section to this. I mean, between you and I, there's a couple songs that aren't my favorite songs of the 16, but like when I try to think of my favorite songs of the 16, I'm like, well, damn, that's like 14 of these. And then the other 2 are Tom and David's favorite songs, stuff like that. It's all, everything carries its weight. But, at the end of the day, a lot of the decision to do so many was that it had been a while. And honestly, when we recorded the album, we expected to have it out, within months of releasing or finishing recording. But we recorded the album 2 years ago now. And, it just didn't work out the way we expected. So it hadn't been that long. When we initially anticipated getting the album out there, it wouldn't have been the full 4 years. It would have been like 2.5 years.
Right.
So even at that point, it wasn't like we have to do 16 to give people what they deserve. It was like the mindset was different at that point in time. But we did, no matter what, want to make sure that we came out swinging. And also the environment within deathcore or metal in general is like, it's kind of popping right now, like it's doing really well. So to contend, you have to bring the big guns. So, there's a lot of factors in our decision-making process. There's much to think about.
No, and I think that's a thing, like why I kind of enjoy getting into the weeds on some of this stuff, because I would love to say that, people maybe aren't having the same conversations I'm having with people. I assume they are, but the difference is like literally I was texting a friend of mine that worked for the company that houses all of the basically the media promos and so forth for albums before they come out. And I was texting him at one point because he's been in the industry for ever since I've known him in different capacities, and I've kind of been swimming through it in my own way, like booking shows, being in bands, writing about shows, and then doing this for a while. And it's one of those things like I texted like an idea I had. I was like, I don't know. I think like maybe this is what's going on. Maybe this is a thing. And like, I don't know. Like, why is it not working for rock and metal? But it's the adverse is what's causing pop and rap to be so, so successful and so on and so forth. And then I just literally like after I sent that text, I was like, I don't know. You actually know more about this shit than me. I'm just like sometimes I'll say something like that and I just go, who the fuck am I? Like, is that opinion even valid? Like, does it even make any sense in relationship to anything? And a lot of times the people will at least validate me for just between the two of us, where they'll be like, no, it's really honest, great questions. I think your insight is pretty accurate on a lot of these things, but it's why I like having these conversations. And instead of making about like, okay, so tell me what this song was about, like let's kind of get into it and kind of like learn more about being in a band, the business of being in a band. And in 2022, like, something that was interesting to me and I didn't even know because it's not in the bio that this record was written that long ago, because I was actually going to make the comment, a lot of people, and it's not making, it's an obvious comparison, but it's an obvious comparison because of what this band has done for the genre as of recent. So it's not to slight you guys or cause any problems, but it's like you look at like what Lorna Shore's doing, and I feel like what they have been doing over since they got Will basically and all the CJ drama, it's like you look at what that band has done and how they have single-handedly brought the attention from a mainstream perspective onto deathcore and onto this extreme style of metal that most people would never have even ventured their toes into listening to. And now you have eyes and ears on the genre that weren't there before. And so I feel like even just looking at what they've been doing and looking at even the viral moment of Kubla Khan a little while ago, that it's like you're starting to see extreme music go to the mainstream. And I feel like all that's got to do is make you all want to be like, all right, well, fuck it. They're getting some shine and they're getting some eyes on. Well, we got to step up our game and we really got to fucking hit home runs, because this is our moment. This is our scene's moment more than it ever has been. And I don't know that, you all collectively put yourself under that kind of pressure to not only put out the best record you can, but have these conversations where you're like, shit, you seen what so-and-so's doing? Yeah, man. Like, all right, fuck it. Like we really got to start running with this and start coming up with ways to get those eyes and ears on your band and what you've been doing. Cause it's not like you're a new band by any stretch of the imagination.
No, I think that is a big obstacle for our band is we've been around so long that it's easy for people to see our name and like, they might read our name, but no thought pops up in their head. It's just like programmed in there. They've seen the name Chelsea Grin 1,000 times, so it doesn't elicit much of a response. And that's, an interesting one. I think the band has had certain reputations in the past, and like, the death metal world is like, it's been a hard fought battle to get them to accept us, and we're still fighting it. But like, it's definitely
Can I cut you off there for a second and ask, why do you think that is?
Well, I mean, here's my theory. When the band first started, they all had straightened hair and they like crab chord in unison and like played the simplest, most brutal music they could. And simplicity is like not in vogue with death metal, especially back in the day. It was sort of a different world, a little less accepting. And so I think the band just sort of developed this persona that was made fun of quite a bit back in the day. And this was before I was even in the band.
Right.
And like as an onlooker, I would see people just shitting on the band, and it was always like people from the death metal community or other, deathcore adjacent communities that were just like, what is this? This genre is the laughing stock of metal right now. And so I think that reputation just took many, many years to sort of push out of. And, I think getting through it has been a product of touring with death metal bands and also starting to write like with more of a death metal mindset. I mean, that's a big thing for me. Like I grew up on a lot of death metal and like black metal and stuff like that. And so I want to write that type of music. So I think fortunately a byproduct of me getting to write what I want is that it's a little more death metal. And so the death metal crowd's a little more open to it. But yeah, it was hard to sort of break that mold that we had been cast into for a long time. And I really do just think it's because when the band first started, people talked so much shit on them. I mean, you couldn't see a positive word about the band on the internet unless, you were on MySpace and like actively searching for like Chelsea Grin fans. Like it was kind of hard to find a nice word. I remember thinking when I was younger, I was like, damn, this band gets a lot of crap. And I feel bad for them. And then, flash forward, here we are now. And it's just been a battle to sort of get out of that laughing stock sort of thing. And I don't say that like, oh, woe is me, pity us. It's like, obviously the band has done fine, considering all of that. But, we just want everyone to like our band, even the death metal heads.
Does that knowing, because I think that's what makes your perspective on the band interesting, because you weren't a part of it then. You looked at it as a fan or as a musician, and now you're a part of it. Mm-hmm. So I feel like when you came into the band, was there maybe some trepidation on your part of joining this band, even though it was probably a better opportunity than the band you were currently in, as far as like the status of what, the opportunities it would provide for you? But then adversely, were you also kind of like, all right, like, I don't want this to be a joke anymore. Like, I want to be the part of the writing of the ship and turning it around and making people be like, damn, I didn't know Chelsea Grin like was all this.
I think, well, when I had joined the band, it was sort of at an interesting time because Jason Richardson had been in the band. And like, if you're familiar with Jason's work, or if you're familiar with his work with Chelsea Grin, it's really intense. Like some of it is just straight up death metal. It's undeniably insane and wild to play. So I felt like that ball had begun rolling for sure by the time I joined. Like that respect chip was being earned, already by the time I had entered. And for me, it was like, okay, I want to embrace that side of things and like really take that ball and run with it. And so I wasn't, it wasn't really a thought in my head like, okay, if I join this band, it's going to be a hard sell. I'm going to have to like really work to make sure I'm writing music that people like. It was like just pure excitement for me at the time, especially given, at the time I was actually working for the band. I was their guitar tech. So I was like, I don't know. I felt attached in a lot of different ways that just made me feel pure excitement. No worries, no nothing. There was no like, okay, well now the work begins. It was like, oh yeah, this is awesome. I'm just going to have so much fun and like, write to my heart's content. So it wasn't like an intimidating feat to kind of enter this band and feel like I had to win a bunch of people over. I didn't really think about it that way at the time. Now that I'm more involved in the band years later is now when I'm like, shoot, I got to win people over because I'm really invested in this and like been doing this for almost 10 years now. I got to like, this is my baby. This is my business. This is my livelihood. So now is where like the stress is happening. But
I just feel like sometimes, and it's something, like one of my favorite bands, Every Time I Die, the last, I'll say half of their career, them getting new drummers basically every other album. It seemed, they lost Rat Boy, got Legs kind of the two records he did were really good. Then they got Daniel Davidson. He fucking killed it on Low Teens. And then they get Goose, on the last one. And somehow the bar just kept going up and up. But It's one of those things where I feel like sometimes I feel like the change in members and getting new blood in, I think helps reinvigorate the brand, because it allows someone to be like, typically you don't join a band if you're not a fan of it in some capacity. So therefore, like when you join, I think a lot of times when you get some new blood in, I think it's what sustains a career 10, 15, 20 years down the line, where, maybe you would have been like, man, we were all ready to pack it up. But then X person came in and really was just like all the things we hated or that we were over, they were excited about. So it re-energized us. And then how could that not then be heard on the new material we're all writing with this person, because they're excited to add their flair to what we do. And to me, I feel like where a lot of people are like, oh, all I see is the inconsistency in lineups and whatever band we're talking about, and that they look at it almost like a downfall. And a lot of times I feel like that's actually what gives bands more of a permission to kind of explore more and maybe keep them around a lot longer to actually write some of the best music that they can put out, because they're still excited and there's still energy in the band. Whereas get a band, I'll just say like an Aerosmith. All right, those motherfuckers have been around for like 50 years. The new music they're putting out sounds like people who are just clocking, like they're just making shit because it sounds good to them. But I don't know. I don't like, it doesn't feel like the group of guys that we all know from Toys in the Attic and Pump and like all these classic records. It doesn't seem like it has the same fire because it's the same fucking dudes that have been jamming together for so long. You're just like, yeah, okay, I know you play this riff. I know you're gonna do this. Hey, drummer dude, I know you're gonna do this because this is what you do. And I feel like sometimes that gets lost a little bit, and sometimes what I think a lot of people view as a negative, I think is actually a positive.
Yeah, I would have to agree. I mean, it's weird. I was just talking with some friends about this the other day, and it was on sort of a different aspect of the industry, but it's like bands are unpredictable organisms that evolve through time, and some organisms evolve to need to detach a part of them and bring in a new piece, and sometimes that new piece is a parasite, and like sometimes that new piece is exactly what you need to become a super organism and thrive. It's like there's no real science that can predict what's gonna do it for a band, or what's gonna ruin a band, or what's gonna do what to a band. But I do feel like for a lot of bands, like you're saying, bringing in a new member kind of like gives a jolt to the system, and sometimes it can be a bad thing, and sometimes it's a great thing. Like I felt like when Tom joined our band, it really sort of reinvigorated something for all of us that like brought us back to life. And it's not as though we were like, it's either Tom joins or someone joins or we stop doing this. It wasn't really a thought in our head. But when Tom joined, we were like, damn, we were pretty close to like not doing this. And now I couldn't imagine not doing this. So, like in our own case, it worked out great. And like, our band has gone through so many member changes. And I won't necessarily say that like everyone that's come in, it's also because I was the new guy at one point too. But like, it's not like everyone that's come in has been, has made the band bigger and bigger, but even like in a social way, even in like a chemistry way, it all helps in some way or another. You don't bring someone into your band unless they're going to benefit you somehow, whether that's even just the hangs. Like, if we brought in another guitarist, I wouldn't care if the dude wrote music. He would just need to be a good guitarist and a good hang. Like that's, the baseline. And that, in turn would make our band more successful. Like a new member can revitalize things in so many ways. But I also don't necessarily feel like everybody's an Aerosmith where like having the same members for X amount of time is going to eventually, you'll see a downtick in the quality of material. But like, and I haven't heard new Aerosmith, so I'm not speaking from experience. No slight to them, but like, I can imagine, I could tell you if I'm writing Chelsea Grin songs in 50 years, those songs will probably suck. I would be tapped out at that point. But I do agree with you. I think it can be a really good thing. And I think people, they develop these attachments emotionally to band members, which I think is awesome because like, if you really enjoy a band, then and you really admire a particular member, then I think that's a great thing. Like, that's a beautiful thing. I really support that. It makes, at least for me, if I have someone who comes up to me and is like particularly a fan of my playing or something like that, you know, it's like a very heartwarming, awesome, uplifting feeling. And I can understand why people feel a sadness when someone leaves a band that they really loved. Like, you know, Pablo, our drummer, has taken a step back for a while, and a lot of people are really bummed by it. And I totally understand, because Pablo's the best. He's one of the greatest people on earth. He's an amazing drummer. He's an amazing vocalist. He's a great guy. He's a lot of fun. And people are sad about it, and I don't hold that against them. But at the same time, it's forced us to change our perspective and, like, you know, think about things a little differently. And it created this product where we're like, okay, we have to fight harder because of this loss, which, you know, is progressing our career further. So it's, you know, it's all related. It's all intermingled. It's all a crazy organism, like I said, where you never know how it's going to evolve or devolve. But yeah, sorry, kind of just ranting there.
No, I mean, that's the whole point of this medium, is to kind of go on random tangents. Like, you know, for a while I would write down a conversation, basically, or at least half of it, my half, where I'd ask questions, and then it became like creative writing, like where I would come up with a question like, "Ooh, that's a good one." You can't ask that right away. You kind of got to get there. So how do I get there? And then I would write questions around, and then I'd move them around, and then it became kind of like a story. I'm like, okay, here's a beginning, and then I get you to like some good stuff in the middle, and then we kind of start winding down, but it kind of brings it back to some other stuff. And then I realized like how unnatural that is, because it's like, where is the real conversation? Like, I'm literally already planning 30 to 40 minutes with you down to like the question, and if we try to even deviate because we found something cooler to talk about in the moment, I have no way to get back, because I'm so focused on what I've already written that I wasn't letting organic things happen. And then it's just like, when you realize that that's not how you interact with people, that's very robotic and weird, that it was just like, all right, then I need to change how I'm doing things, and I need to just be more in the moment. Because then sometimes like the best parts of this show are when the guest just goes off on a tangent, or you say something. And for those that'll watch like the video version, you'll literally see me kind of go like, because I'm thinking of something that you said, and I'm like, that's really interesting. Like, how what is this thought I'm trying to get out, and how can I articulate it when you're done so I don't lose the thought?
Right.
And to me, like, that's why this is more interesting than pretty much any form of interview you're gonna do. I mean, some people might be like, oh, you haven't talked about his guitar or his playing or whatever. And it's like, yeah, but I'm sure if you do something with a guitar magazine or a guitar centric thing, those things will be talked about. But it's like, for someone to get to know you and more about what you think about the band and this record and so forth, and just the things that are happening to you that are informing everything, that's what I find more interesting than anything.
Yeah, I mean, it's no slight to other interviewers, but it's refreshing to do just a conversation, because, you know, by the end of this album cycle, you'll have seen me answer the same questions in 15 different interviews. You know what I mean? And where you could just get that information from one interview, and then in a perfect world, the next interview is a whole new set of questions, a whole new set of information. So I do appreciate the ability to just sort of speak freely and like give the insider scoop, rather than, you know, a rehearsed sort of, you know, not rehearsed, but a pre-programmed, you know, conversation. So, and I think that is where sort of the juicy deets come out, the hot goss and the tea, as they say. So
yeah, this show has definitely had some of that happen in the past, and some of it you're just like there was one I had Davey and Haley from Pop Evil. Dave goes to the bar I work at all the time, and so we did a chat, and then like 3 or 4 days after I posted it, I see like an email notification that like Blabbermouth or Loudwire, someone picked it up, that she had to get a normal job during the pandemic. And I was like, that's news? Out of everything we talked about, that was the thing you're like, oh, running with that. I was like, I mean, not that there was anything juicy or gossipy about anything, but I was like, yeah, like, and water is wet, no shit. Like, I just didn't understand why that was news to me, because I was like, that's just a that's not newsworthy to me. But
no, that kind of shit perpetuates the idea that we're not just normal humans. It's like, what would any human do with 2 years of being unemployed? Or, like, people need jobs, people need money. That kind of stuff is annoying to me, where I'm like you said, a person in society got a job. Wow, that's crazy.
The
Wacky
interesting
stuff.
thing, the interesting thing about this record, though, this double record, to me, I love language, and I love kind of when there's themes to things. Obviously, I only have the first half, so I haven't been able to hear the other half of this, but just I love things being switched on itself. So suffer in hell, suffer in heaven. It's really like, when I saw the title, I was like, man, this is a really damned if you do, damned if you don't. Like, no matter what, you're suffering. So like at the end of the day, to me, when I saw the title, it really it evoked this idea that it doesn't matter where you are, because if you're unhappy, then you're going to be unhappy regardless. It doesn't matter if you're in hell and you're suffering because, oh, well, I'm in fucking hell. Or if you're suffering and you're in heaven, because you could be at the nicest place in the world. But if you still are dealing with shit and you're not taking the time to deal with it, the location doesn't change the situation you're in. I constantly say this to people who go on vacations seemingly to get away from the problems here, and all they tell you about is how great this place was and how shitty it is when you're here. And you're like, you just got away for a couple of days and didn't deal with your own shit. That's all you did. You ran away. You didn't. That doesn't make that place any better or any worse than where you are. It's just that when you came back, you had to deal with the shit you put off. That's all that is. And to me, that's really what I kind of latched onto with this, is that we as people, I tend to feel like we always try to look at things like, if this didn't happen, or if I was somewhere else, these problems wouldn't exist. And I firmly am not a believer of that at all.
No, I mean, you kind of hit the nail on the head. The whole idea behind the title is that nobody is above suffering. We all face it in some degree or another throughout life, at different times in life, for different reasons and to different extents. And it's just sort of part of existing. And no one gets through a full life without some degree of pain and sorrow and suffering. And you can't really hide from it. You just kind of have to accept that. So that's really the idea that we were trying to go for in calling it that. And it's kind of interesting because the album as a whole, or the two albums, I just kind of call them the album, but it's kind of like a positive message. It's, there are dark songs, and a lot of Tom's lyrics come off as like, like negative, not like in like Tom's so negative. It's just like in the metal way, where metal is metal, and it's dark and it's evil and it's heavy and it's negative sometimes. But the message being conveyed is like, there is all this suffering, but at the end of the day, there's perseverance, and there's like getting through it and coming out of it. And there is, light at the end of the tunnel. If you just stick it through, suffering happens, but getting through it also happens. So like, it's a big, dark, heavy title about how everybody's going to suffer, but it's also like, just embrace that and understand the power you have over it, or, the powerlessness you have to it. Just acceptance. So it's a title that, we were in the midst of like lockdown and all these things, and we were like, fuck, everybody's suffering right now. And we're like, well, everybody's suffering always in some way or another, maybe not all at the same exact time, like maybe many of us are right now, but yeah, it just seemed like sort of this, it just made sense.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. Like I was just saying to someone the other day, talking about, time being relative. And I go, it's weird because I know I do this a lot, and I've caught a lot of people doing it, where you'll be talking about something and you're like, oh, like 2 years ago. And then you realize like, no, that was actually like 5 years ago. that it's really interesting. Like, and I understand everyone kind of went through the pandemic in different ways, you know, having different situations happen to them and so forth. But it's one of the few instances I can think of where collectively we as a whole, as people, all went through the same thing. Like no one escaped it. And
Right.
there's not really ever been anything like, obviously we weren't alive for the Great Depression. So it's like, I don't know if literally everyone endured the Depression. Like you might be, because of the class systems and so forth, maybe the rich did not have to deal with the Great Depression like the people of lower class did. But the pandemic affected everyone. Didn't matter if you were rich, poor, you know, where you lived in the country. It affected everybody, and it still is
Where you
affecting
live in the
everybody.
world. You
Yeah.
know what I mean? Like the whole entire planet.
And I can't think of anything where in the history of people that has done that. I can't think of anything where it doesn't matter. Like some things are religious wars because of how you believe or don't believe, or because you're a man or a woman, or you're this or that. Like it doesn't always affect everybody. And
Right.
this was kind of one of those things where it's like, man, you could be rich as shit and you fucking get this and die. You could be broke as fuck, get this and die. You can get that. Like it fucking put everyone's life on hold.
Mm-hmm.
And it really was interesting to see how many people took a lot of things for granted, and like how seemingly now we've kind of forgotten the lessons that I think we all learned along the way. Like, you know, I was very appreciative of having this show already at that point. You know, it was, you know, 4 years into already doing it. And all it did for me was everyone had nothing to do. So, hey, do you want to come on and do this podcast? Fuck yeah, I would love to do anything because I can't do anything. So it allowed me to have that one-on-one interaction and kind of stimulate my brain of having a conversation with someone new, but didn't have that. So like I became very thankful that I started this weird thing years before, because it really helped me get out of the funk that a lot of people were put in. But it's just weird to think back that everyone experienced this thing, and that we may never have hopefully never have a situation like this where everyone collectively has to go through something the same and kind of just put your life on hold for 2 years. Today's Beer Minute is brought to you by Starving Artist Brewery, who share a simple belief you should judge beer and not people. Today's beer is from New Holland Brewing out of Holland, Michigan. It's their Hazy Ravagers Hazy IPA. Coming in at 7%, this Hazy IPA hints at something a little different with notes of pears, grapes, and some sort of citrus as well. This one was solid, but think the Hazy River IPA this company puts out is the superior of their IPAs personally. Thanks to Starving Artist Brewing, who remind you to support your starving artists. And please, always drink responsibly. And now, back to the show.
Yeah, I would hope not. But I agree, you know, that the forced pumping of the brakes and, you know, near complete halt was very introspective and like a reflective time for many, many people. And, you know, I felt similarly that like I haven't lost my job. I can't tour, but I still have this other half of my job that's my favorite part of the job, which is writing. And, you know, I was like, wow, I'm grateful that I can sit in a studio for, you know, sit in my studio for a year and write a bunch of music. Like I've never had the opportunity to just sit here and write music. And you know, I started my own personal studio during the pandemic. And, you know, that was another thing that I was like, oh, well, if I didn't have the chance to slow down for a bit, then I wouldn't have had the chance to like really kind of play into my abilities, my talents, and my passions, you know. And it's not like if I could go back, I would rather COVID have never happened, right? But like I am grateful for what I was able to find out about myself and what I was able to make happen in my life during that time. And I think a lot of people are, but I also, like you said, I think some people sort of forget the lessons learned through the time. I'm seeing a lot of people just kind of act as if nothing ever happened, when it's like, well, no, you know, even if you're not like discussing COVID specifically, it's like a lot happened with just you as a human, like with all of us as individual humans during this time. So don't act like nothing happened. You need to like acknowledge what you went through, because no one went without transforming at least a little bit over the last few years. there's some change that everybody endured.
I think it's interesting to see and to like think about like you know, you had talked about this record being done and then basically everything kind of shutting down. And I think a lot of bands were kind of trying to wait it out because touring is kind of, I mean, as we were saying, literally to start the chat, it's like record sales don't mean shit anymore. You know, bands aren't making money off of record sales anymore. Like the touring is where how everyone is able to sustain and make a living. And so it was interesting to kind of see some bands be like, we're just going to ride this out because we don't want to put out a record and then basically have it be forgotten. And it's even interesting to see some of the bands like, you know, Killswitch is a great example. Like they're like, a lot of bands are hunkering down and writing music. We put out a record right as the pandemic happened. So we're not going to like just like lose that record and touring cycle. Like we're going to still tour in support of it, try to do at least a year or so when we can. And then we're going to try to go back and write a record. Because what was the point of putting out that record then and not giving it its fair due after we spent all that time, blood, sweat, and tears putting our lives into those songs and so forth. But now adversely, I'm sitting here going like, all right, you guys put out a double record. It was recorded apparently like 2 years ago. I would be foolish to think that there's not already new material being written currently, because that's just the state of how things are now, like where you constantly have to keep putting deposits into your bank. So that way, like when it's time to get going, you're ready to go because you can't afford to just write in a studio and waste all that time and money.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's a lot of people who go, you know, do a similar thing, you know, or are like me in that they're always writing. But dude, I just have like hundreds of anywhere from 30 seconds to 2 minutes, like ideas on my computer of so many different genres of music, not even just metal. And it's like the writing never stops, ever, ever, ever. I mean, I had most of the records we're writing right now written within a year or two of, well, like within a year and a half of releasing our last record, Eternal Nightmare. And I had some of this written before Eternal Nightmare, and I just didn't use it for Eternal Nightmare. Like the writing just never ceases. I've probably got another 2 Chelsea Grin records sitting on my computer. And like, I'm not saying they're gonna be the records, but it's like if I took the material I have, I could sustain the record creating process for a long time. You know, it's like that is an ever, it never stops, that train. And like I'm grateful for that because I'm a slow writer. Like I take a lot of time to write music, and I'm super methodical and like anal and like I'm also a studio guy, so I'm like really anal about that side of things as I'm writing too, which is sort of an impedance on my progress. But like, you know, it's just it's sort of like a tick for me. I have to be anal in that regard. But yeah, I mean, just always writing constantly, always preparing for the next move. I think, you know, I didn't expect there to be a pandemic when I was writing these records, and I expect it all to be normal and to have an album out 2 years after our last album. But you know, things changed, and I was just glad that I was prepared, at least with material to like sort of face this challenge and make sure that we could come back swinging with a lot of music. But yeah, always writing. I think a lot of people are always writing, and it's easier now more than ever to always be writing because you can have a computer and a $200 interface and a you know, some drum programming software. You've got all you need to like write music. So, you know, we're in a day and age where fortunately it's so easy to just constantly be creating. So there's really no excuse. Like, I mean, outside of like personal matters and stuff like that, like I get that sometimes you're just not in a place to write or be creative, but yeah, it's kind of a cool time where we have the option of just always being busy and preparing for the next move. And I'm grateful for that. And writing, you know, really is what got me through 2 years of downtime, is being able to do that and being able to just exercise creativity because I wasn't exercising anything else. So
I think what's been
topic, but
no, I mean, and it's interesting because I feel like something that I've really enjoyed as someone who enjoys the creative process. Like, you know, I grew up in that era where we started getting a ton of those, making of documentaries, like when bands are making a record.
Yeah.
And there was an old roommate of mine that was in a local band that I really looked up to and I thought was going to make it, but just internal fighting kind of broke that band up before they could really get to that next level. But I remember like sitting down with him and like jamming, and like that dude was so meticulous in his songwriting and would like be like, all right, like, and we'll record these songs and there'd be like 17 different versions of it, because it's like, oh, the chorus changes just slightly on this one. Do I like this, or do I like this tail riff? Do I like the bridge doing this, or this going this way, or here's different vocal ideas, and so on and so forth. And it was just like, I remember being like at one point, because I started learning how to play some of these. So when he was trying to flesh out and try out band members, it's like, if it was a bass player, I'd hopped on the other guitar and I learned how to play these other guitar parts. If the guitar player came in, I learned how to play him on bass. And it was wild to like be that regimented in both quote unquote a studio setting, where it's like, hey, play this part for me real quick. I just got like, your idea was kind of cool. And I'm like jotting it down. He's like, play it again. Play it again, play it again, play it again. It's not perfect. And I'm like, dude, I don't give a fuck about that right now. Like, it's the feeling. Like, we just wrote this part. This part's cool. Like, let's just get it down on tape, and then like we'll fucking do that later. But he's like, but if you don't nail it now, then when we start playing or we start doing stuff, then it's not going to be perfect and it'll be sloppy. And it's just like, I mean, yes, I get that, but also I'm like, what's the point though? We're not playing these for anyone at this point. They're just literally basement recordings, and all we're doing is playing them in front of each other in the basement. Like, there's really not a need for this. But then it was very weird to then go into a band that never practiced, and all we did was play shows. And it was just like, we're the sloppiest band ever, because we don't like, I'd never even had a practice with them. And I was just like, it was so weird to go from one extreme to the other, where it's like, all I did was practice and record parts. And then like, I could still pick up the guitars behind me and play those songs. Like today, I still know those parts. I couldn't tell you any of the songs that I fucking was playing in that other band, because I still don't think I ever actually learned how they went. I kind of figured it out and faked it as I went. And it was just like, it's so interesting to see that different part. But I also think the pandemic was really interesting in the fact that a lot of people started doing like Twitch and stuff like that, and expanding what that was. It's not just video games. It's now watching people make songs, write songs. And there are people like, Devin from the Acacia Strain, and even Tom when he was still in the band. And it was interesting to kind of watch them, like Instagram videos of like, oh, I'm just riffing this minor blues scale or whatever. And you're like, I didn't know you could play that kind of style or whatever. But then you would hear how that, like on some of the newer stuff, like those bluesy kind of bends and pull-offs and stuff are now in the new stuff. And it's really interesting to see when someone takes the time to let you into their songwriting experience, or just things that they're into and practicing, and that you're like, oh, this is where this element came from that I had no idea where it came from before. And it's been really cool to kind of be let in on the secrets of songwriting from a lot of different people that are just metal guys.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think, like technology, Twitch, things like that, and just the general openness across social media, and just like a willingness to let people into your process is at an all-time high. And it's really cool. Like, I think it's awesome. I've watched some friends. I've watched Devin's stream. I've seen like, I've just like been curious, and I kind of even did the same thing myself for a while. I was streaming on Twitch through like the front half of the pandemic, and was writing material, doing studio stuff. Like, I didn't play video games or anything. It was just exactly this, like working on music. I actually wrote our first single off this album, Origin of Sin. I started writing on stream. And so like, I've had people be like, holy shit, I remember when you were programming those, like that orchestral section at the beginning of it. And I was like, yeah. I mean, I didn't even know at the time that you were going to be hearing this in a format, but yeah, it's kind of cool having that insight. And I think it's like an encouraging thing. Like, if you see someone's just sitting in their bedroom streaming themselves write music and it sounds awesome, and they don't have all this crazy gear, they're not in some crazy studio, it's kind of like an empowering thing. It's like, wow, I really can get this done. I can create something from nothing with not too much, like there's not too many obstacles stopping me from doing this. And like, I always encourage people, whenever people come up to me at a show and they're like, man, I just want to like have a band so I can start writing songs. I'm like, dude, you literally don't need a single other person to write other songs. Like, maybe if you can't do vocals, then you need a vocalist. But like, you can do anything you need with a computer and $500. You know, like you can get everything done. And maybe it won't sound insane, but like you can write music. Everybody can write music. So, well, I mean, I was going to say so easily. Obviously, there's a lot of factors to the equation of like being able to write music, but like as far as technology and having resources at your disposal to do it, like it's super easy to just start writing. And I think that's really, really awesome. I mean, I grew up writing in a room with bands, and like that's how I started, was jamming.
So fucking tedious.
The worst. I could not imagine. Like we always joke about like if we were to try to do that now, like our particular band, it would just not work whatsoever. And like we're all on in-ears, so it'd be like, all right, put your ears in, I'm gonna play a riff, and then like you finish the riff and like take your ears out, you're like, what'd you guys think of that riff? And then like can't hear each other because we've got our ears on, just like all this stuff. And we're also just not like, I'm a slow writer, like I said, so like it's not like we bang out a song in a day. Like it would just be the worst. And I think back to like 16-year-old me being like, dude, you're a pussy, you just write music in a room with your band. Like, but
it's so interesting when to like think back to that, because like a lot of people will like see some of the shit I have and they're always like, oh, like what do you write? And I'm like, I'm not good at writing. Like I get really ADHD kind of about shit. Like I'll come up with a riff and I'm like, that's cool, and then I'll just try to like keep working on it until something comes, but then I'll fuck around and something else sounds good, and then I completely forgot what I was just working on. And then I'm like, well, that's gone. All right, let's see where this thing goes. And then like I kind of get it to a point, and then I'll kind of be like, huh. And then like I'll pick up with like different guitar, different tuning, something, try to play around the same riff in a different tuning. And then all of a sudden like something else sounds good, and then I just abandoned the thing I've been working on. But I realize like it's interesting to see songwriting processes for people, and even lyric writing. Like, you know, like I said, I love language and I love like to read, and writing it's almost like a form of exercising, like of putting a puzzle together. And I realize like very much like in my life, I'm not the best at something, but I'm really good at helping people be good at what they're doing. So like I remember working with my roommate, and like him and this other guitar player writing something, and then the one dude left and him and the drummer were still working on the idea. I knew how to play the riff enough because I'd been listening to it for like 3 hours on loop because they were trying to figure out how to make this riff work. And then finally he left, and then they were like, this needs something. I go, I don't know. I know if like this dude like is like a good friend of mine, I know he likes weird time signature shit. So like I feel like you guys keep repeating this part this many times, it feels weird, and like it's hanging around too long. I think we need to like cut it by 2. And they're like, so you mean we got to play it in, and I think it was like 5/4 or something like that. I was like, I don't know, dude. I just know that like when I'm playing this riff with you guys, like, and I'm just feeling it, it doesn't feel right. But like, let's try it this way, because this is something I know from listening to my friend play this long. This is how he writes. So then we kind of did it, and they're like, yeah, that feels really cool. And then it goes into this way easier. It's a better transition. And I was like, sure. Like, I'm good at that. Like, I'm good at listening to something going, this doesn't work, let's try this. Or, hey, do that again. Here's an idea I have. Like, you could, and then like putting pieces together and then just being like, let's try that. But you could hand me an instrument, and typically I'd be like, oh, I don't know. Like, what are you playing? Let me kind of figure this out. And it's really weird because like I used to say like, I can't write for shit. And someone's like, you literally just helped us write a song. And I'm like, not really though. I just took what you were doing and gave you an idea. And they're like, but that's songwriting. Like if you were in a studio with like a pop person, you would get songwriting credits for that because you were in the room and gave an idea that ended up on record.
I was going to say that's just literally being a producer. I mean, some producers can play, but like we've gotten to producers who they could never play one of the riffs, but they were like, hey, you should put a riff that sounds kind of like this right here. That's just, producing. You know what I mean? That's the songwriting side of studio work, which is an important role. That's where I want to get. I want to eventually just write so many songs and just tell people what to do so much that one day I realize I can't play guitar anymore. And And it's because I've been dictating what other people should play on their guitars for so many years. Like that's my goal, is to get there, just slowly, eventually not touch instruments and just be like, this riff here, make it sound like this, and then try to like mouth it to them.
I feel like the goal, if I were to ever get into that side of shit, is I'd want to be like a top line like writer consistently.
Yeah.
And for those that don't know what that means, it's usually like when you write the lead melody or something that gets built upon. Because usually that's where your big bucks are when you're writing.
If you write the top line, then chances are you got a nice house.
Yeah.
I mean,
like again, that's
but
yeah. But I always find that kind of shit interesting, and you know, I think I feel like though it's weird because I don't know if kids nowadays like have those uber producers that they look up to. Like I feel like we grew up, or I'll say at least me, I don't know how old you are. I just turned 38, but like I grew up in the era of like super producers where like producers' names meant something. Like you would buy a record just because of who produced it. Like the Ross Robinsons, the Brandon O'Briens, like the Mutt Langs, like the Adam D's, if we're gonna go metal. You know, even Will Putney now. And like, you know, like we have some, but I don't feel like we have the people that like, I don't think this generation has those people where they're like, oh my God, did you hear the mix on this? Did you hear the production on this? I know if I pick up this record by so-and-so, it's going to be insane. And I can't wait to buy it.
Yeah. You know, it's like, it's kind of hard for me to even like fathom this, because from my perspective, producers, like I love to think about these things. I'm like, oh shit, Zach Cervini was involved on this record. Oh my God. Oh shit, Drew Folk did this one. Oh shit, Zach Jones. Oh, you know, like Lance did this one. It's like I think about that so much, but then I try to think about if fans or listeners are thinking about that at all. I don't know. I don't want to like discredit or undermine my producer friends, but like I don't know if it carries the same weight as it did back in the day. I mean, like I also remember being like, dude, Slipknot's going to record in a haunted mansion with Rick Rubin, and I was just like, wow, that's the coolest thing on earth. I'm 100% buying that record when it comes out. And like the producer was part of the equation. I mean, I would buy a Slipknot record whether or not, but like it was something I would get excited about. And I do see like chatter here and there, especially as like bands within a scene start going to like the same producer. You start to get people being like, oh, I sense that this was an X person production. And like, you know, you see chatter there, but I don't know if it's quite in the same limelight. But also I'm sort of out of touch with a lot of other genres. Like maybe this is a thing elsewhere. But in metal, maybe not. I don't know. It's like, sorry, I have bad hips, so I have to adjust my sitting position.
No worries. It's kind of the same thing. I don't know, because like my friend Josh Schroeder, like obviously he's been making a name for himself for over a decade. I mean, with the bands he was in, I remember like him doing the first Battlecross record was like one of his first bigger, you know, production things he did. Then, you know, working with the Color Morale on No Hope kind of brought him more into modern metalcore sound. Right. And then he was kind of doing stuff like that, A Plea for Purging. Like he was kind of in the underground. And then it was working with King A10 kind of brought him to the mainstream because, you know, it's Roadrunner. It's weird. It's different. It's a lot of things. And then to now, obviously, what he's been doing with Lorna Shore, like expanding their thing. It kind of reminds me, speaking of producers that I love, it reminds me sort of Evans with Dillinger Escape Plan. Mm-hmm. He kind of been able to work with some bands, and he is very much, I would say, like an Evans, or actually I would say he's more like a John Feldman, where he gets in and really starts breaking down songs and wanting to like work with the artist on a songwriting level of like, why are we writing this? Let's try these different things. And so the language of the output of music is changing with them, but he's an equal part of the dialogue of music with those people. And I think a lot of times bands are too quick to, you know, not want to work with the person, or they're too busy so you can't work with them. And I think sometimes instead of trying to go somewhere else and see if what happens with a new producer, I do kind of enjoy the fact that, you know, a band like Lorna Shore and some of these other bands that consistently go to Josh, it's like they're getting to continue the conversation they've been having from the jump. And there's that familiarity, but it's also them allowing each other to grow. Like Josh maybe learns how to do this, or he's recording to tape, or he's whatever he's doing. But also the band is progressing and they're becoming new people as musicians and finding new ways to express themselves. And I don't know. I don't know if it's a carryover into the world we live in now, where we're just too wrapped up in let's go on to the next thing, man. Let's just keep going instead of waiting for what will probably be the betterment of everyone involved.
Yeah. I mean, it's sort of between a rock and a hard place for bands right now. I mean, just insofar as like needing to churn stuff out is like you have to get stuff out there. I mean, even from our own personal experience, 4 years is just too long. I mean, we didn't really have an option otherwise, but like that's just not ideal. And like you have to remain in people's minds to like stay relevant. I mean, that's kind of like an obvious statement, but like, you know, I can understand why bands would need to just do whatever it takes to get the album out. But I do also appreciate when a band finds their chemistry and runs with it. I feel like we haven't, you know, it's interesting when I think about it from my band's story. We've done every single record with a different person. Jeff Dunn, who mixed and mastered our new record, also was like extremely collaborative on the mix and master for our last one. So he's like the only person that's been a consistent carryover from Eternal Nightmare. But like, it's weird because for our band, it's almost we've had no problem with anyone we've worked with. We've loved every studio experience we've had. We really only started working with producers who actually contributed to songwriting on Eternal Nightmare and this new one. So in the past, it wasn't quite as involved for the band and the producer, or, you know, it was more just like a mix mastering engineer and an engineer to track the record. Not much creative input. But like for us, I would love to have just the person that we always went to keep our sound consistent, not necessarily creatively, but like sonically.
Mm-hmm.
But you know, there's beauty too, and it's fun that we've been able to work with so many different people, because I feel like, at least for me, because I do so much of the writing, it's been like I've just been trying to be a sponge to just absorb as much as I can from all these different people that we've worked with. So like the band is gaining a lot of experience from that process as well. Like I learned so much from the writing and recording of Eternal Nightmare that I used for this record. And for the next record, I'm going to take that knowledge plus all the crazy knowledge I gained from this record from working with Zach Jones and apply that to, like, you know, future releases. It's like, I don't know, that relationship is really awesome. And like, I love producers. I love going to a studio and like getting really close with someone and like how having them contribute to the writing process. I think it's freaking awesome. And like, you know, even though we haven't gone with the same guy twice, it's like part of our sound. I feel like to sort of every album have like a different, something different to it creatively. Yeah. So like it sort of plays into our aesthetic to have that, whereas other bands find their home in one person and then like that's how they hit the jackpot. You know, it's just another one of those like crazy sciences within the world of bands. It's like sort of unpredictable and non-exact, but awesome and badass too.
It's just interesting to remember a time where, you know, you talk about these super producers and you wonder how much of the sound of the scene at the time was because of the producer or was almost the detriment of the scene because it all sounded the same. Like, make no bones about it, I think Adam D records still hold up today sonically, but he doesn't really do anything anymore. Like, he kind of does his stuff and maybe some other stuff when he wants to, but he's not like he was, where it's like working on the Kill Switch record, then I'm doing Under Oath, now I'm doing Unearthed, now I'm doing As Lay Dying, now I'm doing like literally every band in the scene that I'm in, I'm doing everyone's records. And it's like you can go back and it felt like the scene got elevated to a degree, but I don't know if it had so much to do with because Adam's style of production and being someone who wanted the best from his bands and wouldn't let someone put out some bullshit with his name on it.
Mm-hmm.
So therefore, the rest of the bands had to get to Adam's level of what he expected to put his name on a record, and everyone knew they had to bring their best. So therefore, that's why those records are as good as they are and sound still as good as they do. But I also don't know if maybe that was the downfall of it, is that then everyone kind of started sounding the same because it sounded like an Adam D record. And, you know, I feel like maybe now we're kind of in this interesting point where it's like, is there more diversity in band sounds because everyone kind of works with a handful of different people and it's not the same 2, 3, 4 people kind of curating the scene, as it were?
Yeah. I mean, I think so. It may be hard for me to express this point. I want to make sure I say it in the correct way. But like with a situation like with Adam D, like he sets the standard. And then beyond that, I think it's really on the band to make sure that they create something different and like up to par. So like Adam D sort of taking and steering or influencing a genre to in a certain direction, and then bands feeling like they need to follow suit. Like it's on the band at that point if they're making a record that sounds too much like Adam D or something he's been involved in. So he may have created the industry standard, but it's still a creative world. So you need to like separate yourself in your own way. And I do think that now we're in a time where so many bands sound so different, even within one genre, like deathcore. It's such a wide, like it's a very broad genre. Like people consider Lorna deathcore, and then you've got us, and like we're two very different bands. And then you've got Whitechapel, who's another very different band. And then you've got Thy Art, who's another different band from all of us. And then you've got
Carnifex.
Carnifex. And
That's
then
the
you've
one
got
I was here.
Oceano, and you've got like some of the newer bands like Spite, Left to Suffer. Like all of these bands are under one umbrella, but they all sound different. Yeah. I mean, maybe that's to my like metal ears, you know, you show this you know, like there's people who are probably like, this all sounds the same.
Yeah,
who don't really listen to metal, but like that's one thing that I think is really cool and it's really interesting about the deathcore genre in particular, is that there's no one stamp. It's like, I think breakdowns, you know, like that's the one thing you can expect out of every deathcore band. And other than that, it's like you can do whatever the hell you want in this genre. If you have a breakdown, then you're included in this deathcore umbrella. And you know, I think it's really, really awesome. So like there is no one sound, there is no one person like dictating what everything has to sound like. Like we may all influence one another, but like there's no band, there's nothing when I'm writing that I'm trying to achieve based on another person's music. Like it's 100% internal. I don't even listen to other music when I'm writing. Like I won't, unless it's like my favorite all-time bands that I listen to every day anyway. But there's like no new music intake that goes on when I'm in the studio writing. It's like, it's just interesting. And I think a lot of people are that way. I mean, there are people that are like, oh, I want to sound like this band. But when I talk to most of my friends that are writing music in these bands nowadays, it's like they're just trying to sound like themselves. And so it's creating this amazing diversity within this micro this micro ecosystem that is the deathcore genre. I think it's pretty exciting. And I don't know. I know that we started this off by talking about, you know, like producers' influence on the scene. But like you kind of said yourself, there's a lot of people involved with a lot of different producers, and even people who aren't involved with producers at all. And it's just creating this massively diverse, you know, genre, this massively diverse community right now.
It's funny because like at times I've really been trying to diversify the show and who I have on. So like coming up, you know, I have like Tyler Bryant from Tyler Bryant and the Shakedown, who's his other guitar player is actually God, I can blank on the dude's name, but it's one of the guitar players from Aerosmith's kid.
Wow.
And like he's kind of in this like sort of like not quite country, but not quite rock, kind of something right in between. And it's fun and it's different and I enjoy it. And it's like, sometimes I'll try to just go far away from metal to the point where a lot of people are like, do you even like metal? And I'm like, I do, but I've been listening to it for so long that I'm at the point now where not a whole lot of it really excites me, because at times all I think of is, oh, this just sounds like so and so, or this is influenced by so and so because it's a newer band. So it's going to take them maybe 1 or 2, 3 records to get out of the like, here are our influences vibe into whatever they're going to become. And that's not discrediting any band. It's the reality. Like, now I understand why when I would listen to different metal bands or whatever, my dad would be like, oh, this reminds me of blank. Why don't we just listen to blank? Because I already know like that service is the thing I want from it, instead of being like, oh, it's almost there, it's just not quite. But it's interesting because like the other day I went to go to the Bring Me Knocked Loose show, and I've been seeing, like, there was a friend of ours that met us at the show, and she was like, oh, I saw Knocked Loose for the first time at Blue Ridge Festival like a couple of weeks ago. And I was like, oh, she was like, they were so good. They were so good. They were so good. I was like, I mean, you live here in Grand Rapids like I do. Like, how have you not seen them over like the last like 8-9 years? I was like, I remember seeing them opening for Acacia Strain. I remember seeing them open for Eat It. I remember seeing them like on this tour. Then like they started taking out those bands themselves. Like it's just weird. Like, I was like, they just literally headlined the main room at the intersection, like with Kubla Khan and like a whole bunch of awesome great bands. Like, how were you not there? And my wife just kind of looked at me. She's like, and this isn't discrediting them, but it's a shift in perspective. She goes, when they go to festivals like a Blue Ridge festival, like they don't go to hardcore shows. They're not going to the stash and going into a 400 cap room where it's full of like sweaty fucking big dudes just throwing the fuck down. They're not going to see like a band like Year of the Knife or 200 Stab Wounds or Nails or any of these other kind of things like you and I may randomly go see on a Monday night. Like, that's not the world they grew up in. That's not the world they come from. They are more radio, metal, and hard rock. And I was like, oh. Right. But it was interesting to see, like, because I don't remember who the first, Grandson. And that was very whatever to me. But Knocked Loose came on, and I was like, oh, I'm going to hang back. I'll hang out with my wife and the people we came with. And then, like, the first couple of notes rang out, and I was like, nah, fuck this. I can't be at a show like this and not be, like, as close to it as I possibly can be. Like, I didn't want to, I'm not trying to, like, be active in it, but I was basically in it and kind of, like, around it. And it was like, this is what I love. I love this feeling of, like, there's a little danger, it's a little bit of excitement, it's a cathartic release. And I had this epiphany on this show a couple of weeks ago, talking to someone about going to all these different kinds of shows. And I was like, I guess I never realized that going to metal and hardcore and all these different subgenres, it's the only time where you really let out like all these frustrations and anger and shit, like where you have these like the cult, like as I call them, the t-shirt moments, the slogans on the back of the t-shirt, and like where you get to yell it out loud and everyone's doing it with you and it's fun and you just feel like, oh, I needed that. I don't go see anybody else in any other genre and feel that. I go to watch those people perform and have a good time with an arena full of people or however many thousands of people are at these things. But that's it always keeps bringing me back when I go to metal and hardcore shows. That's the thing I love about it. That little bit of danger, the excitement, and just the cathartic release that I can't get anywhere else. And I guess you either understand it or you don't. But it's really weird because like I know some people at that, when Knocked Loose is set, it was the first time and the only time all night it felt like a normal hardcore show that just happened to be outside in an arena or outside. Right. And you're just like, the fact that there are bands that can translate to that level gives me hope that maybe the genre as a whole can get that big. But it's something that I've actually kind of enjoyed talking about. I feel like the genre itself gets in its own fucking way, because whereas I feel like you look at a band like Bring Me, they're bringing all the bands out from the scene they started in. They're trying to bring up some of these bands. Unfortunately, and this is a question I was going to ask earlier too, speaking of, first week album sales and shit. I was saying the other day, do first week album sales even fucking matter anymore? I was like, look at a band like Knocked Loose. I don't know that they sell a ton of records, but every opportunity they're given, they fucking crush. And to me, that's all that matters. Is their live show fucking awesome? Is it going to get more people to word of mouth it and keep coming? then that's all you're really looking for is what are your numbers doing? Because at the end of the day, I guarantee you, no one's really giving a fuck about first week numbers because they're going to fall off hard as shit the next week anyway. So what does it really matter? Are people coming to see this band? I think that should be the only thing that matters anymore.
Yeah, it's interesting. The metrics of like band business and industry business are shifting a lot right now. Because like you said, you can't rely on first week numbers to like gauge where a band's at. You can't rely on monthly listeners to gauge where a band's really at. It's about how many people are coming to a show and how much merch you're selling. Like, I really think, I think all these metrics do matter, but it's just in different ways. Like if you're planning a tour, then you want to bring bands that bring people to shows. You know what I mean? I think that's really important. If you're cultivating a playlist or whatever else, like, there's other metrics that may be important. If you're trying to put together a merch drop, you need to know like other certain numbers. Like all these numbers have their value, but I agree. It's like what a band is bringing to a live show is really important. And that's a number that's always, kind of crazy across the board too, because there's so many things that influence how many people come to a show. How many other tours are happening at the same time that are genre adjacent? Like what's your package look like? Well, not your, body package, but like your tour package.
Tour package.
Like all sorts of things. When's the last time that you toured? Like, have you saturated the market too much? Like sometimes a band tours so much, their last tour in a cycle is kind of shot. And then, but like you have to be wise enough to understand if you're looking at that band as potential for support, you have to understand that it's only shot because maybe they just overdid it. Or maybe they're just at the end of a cycle and like they just went really hard. Now everybody's seen them 3 times this year and they maybe don't want to see them a 4th time when they could go to another show. Like there's so many things that play into even just the attendance metric. It's like, it's really crazy, really, really crazy. I do not envy the people that have to like really analyze this stuff. I mean, I guess when we're trying to plan a headliner, we have to think about it in some degree about the bands that are coming out, but usually that's our booking agent's job, but like, I do think it's just a crazy world. It's like a crazy industry that's really evolving, and we're in our lifetimes witnessing. I mean, I feel like in a lot of people's lifetimes, even generations prior to ours, witnessing a music industry upheaval, just a massive change in the way the industry operates. So it's not just unique to us, but like we are witnessing some pretty crazy things. The digitization of things is completely taking this physical thing off the market. And whereas even in my lifetime, even when I first started releasing music with Chelsea Grin, physicals were extremely important, and that was not even 10 years ago. So it's like, it's interesting having to adapt to these new numbers and like figure out what to judge a band on. It's like, it's really weird. It's really, really weird.
That's like I learned because I was making the comment to the same person I said I was texting yesterday about just industry shit. And I said, what's really interesting is I feel like forever the industry has tried to figure out a way scam numbers always. And I go like for a while it was, if you buy a ticket to our concert, you get the album for free. That's how so many bands like Prince had the #1 record in the world and no one fucking knew anything about it because who bought it? Well, you all did when you bought tickets to his concert and sold it all out across the world. So, then they stopped doing that because, that's falsifying your numbers. And then, Victory taught me that, because I always wondered why Victory bands had so many versions of the same fucking record. And it would be like 4 months later, here's this with the DVD, here's this one with B-sides and stuff on it or whatever. And it's like for every one of those, that was 2 units sold. So if you did that a couple times and put out a couple of different versions, the diehard people are going to buy that thing to have the new thing that you're packaging. Well, now that's 2 versions sold. So I know like a couple of different Victory records. I have 3 different versions of the same CD. That's 6 different copies that I bought and that they got off me, technically, off the same record. Now, as I learned the other day, because I was like, I don't understand like these long rollouts. Like, I feel like, I don't know, we already kind of talked about it, but I was like, I feel like maybe it's a way to cheat the system. So like, I mean, I guess those streams or whatever of those songs have to count toward your first week numbers, because why else would you fucking do it? And then someone's like, they do. And I go, okay, now this makes sense, because now the longer the rollout, if you put out 4, 5, 6, 7 songs, and we'll say each one's, if you're of a band of a certain size, gets 1 million or more hits, now your record's starting off in the close to 10 million thing. And I go, like, literally, and I'm not punching down at We Car, but it's like, We Came as Roman's record apparently moved like, I think like 30 something or 50,000 something or whatever. But it's like, okay, like if they were to have almost 10 million streams of their songs that they released before, now you're starting and it looks a hell of a lot better for your first week numbers, but it's still falsifying the information a little bit. So I'm wondering like when that will become like, oh, that doesn't count anymore. Whatever you put out, those numbers count as a single. They don't get tacked on to your album sales. Your album sales only accumulate when you drop the album at whatever time that is to the following week. And then that's your actual representation of what your first week numbers are. To which point I wonder if we'll see the numbers drop even worse as a result of that.
Yeah, I mean, that would definitely affect numbers quite a bit. I mean, I kind of feel a little torn about it because, if you're releasing singles off of an album, it's part of the album. It's that song is going to be streamed once the album comes out anyway. But it's also at the time where like we're saying, like first week numbers are a metric that people don't really give a shit about anymore anyway. Not give a shit about, but like don't care about in the same way. So in my mind, I'm just like, whatever, add your first week numbers because who cares? Like, do your thing. It's kind of interesting for this double rollout. One of the incentives, we didn't even think about it when we planned the double album, but it's all under Suffer in Hell, Suffer in Heaven as one thing. So like, I don't think we'll get our first week until the week after Suffer in Heaven comes out. And that's all going to count under one umbrella. And that was just sort of like a happy byproduct. But it's like, we're not conscientiously cheating the system. We're just like, it's just working out in such a way that like that hopefully will look really good and like be really awesome for a number that maybe doesn't matter as much anymore. But like, it is interesting. It is interesting, and adapting, there's adapting in the positive ways, and then there's adapting in ways to like cheat the system and like make the system work for you in maybe a more malicious way. I don't know. It's once again being at like the forefront of all of this is interesting to watch how it unfolds and see how people like get crafty with it. Like the masterminds, I've seen people in rooms just like churning out ideas on how to like capitalize on where we're at right now in an industry. And it's just like, wow, this is not how my brain works, but this is part of the business. And like, there's always going to be people trying to figure out how to take advantage of this. There's always going to be people trying to figure out how to maximize this. It's kind of a crazy, like, point in time to be in and to watch things unfold through. I don't hold it against any band, especially in the metal world, for doing what they need to do to get their numbers to a place they need to get them to thrive. Like this genre is hard enough as it is. And like, maybe U2 putting their album on every Apple product in the world wasn't really cool. But like,
did you read because I was just reading yesterday, I guess it's like the anniversary of that record being put on everyone's phone, like like a 10 or a 15 year or whatever.
Wow.
And Bono was reflecting on it, and they were talking, and sorry to cut you off about this, but it's so weird that like you literally brought this up, and I was like, man, this is such an interesting talking point, because he was talking about how at the time they were just trying to figure out how to get your music out, and that if you were to get your music out to someone, because everything was changing to digital, so they just wanted to be everywhere that they could be. And so they never looked at it as an invasive thing of like, oh, like you're invading the ability to get into our technology and just put something on our phone that we didn't want at all. You didn't even ask. It's an invasion of privacy. And he said it was interesting to kind of, and I'm paraphrasing like hell, he said that basically it was interesting the conversation it started all those years ago. Yeah. And that what it really was born out of was him going to Apple And they were like, well, no one's going to pay you for the record. And he goes, no, you're going to pay us. And then you put it on the things. And this is before DSPs became what they are now. But it was the beginning basically of DSPs. It was the beginning of going to more of a platform like we have now. And it was interesting to look back on that one thing and how really it changed a lot of shit. Because he was talking about the guy that they were working with had just started at Apple, and he took ownership of like, we fucked up, like, and here's how you get the record off, and I'm sorry, and you know, everyone is right to feel the way that they feel about this. But it was also one of those that apparently because of how he reacted to that, like God, why am I blank? Steve Jobs like promoted him to like have a role within Apple Music or something like that because of how he handled it and how he was willing to take a big risk to do something that hadn't been done. And that where the music industry was at the time was, we don't know what we're doing right now. Obviously you can go on iTunes and buy albums and singles and so forth, but maybe streaming an album is where things are heading. And we need someone that's willing to take a giant risk and a band that's willing to take the giant risk. But like I said, it is interesting to see all these years later how that one conversation between the dudes at Apple and U2 changed so much of what we do. I mean, I definitely never thought of the bigger ramifications of what they did and how it literally was kind of the beginning of what we have now for between Spotify and Apple. That was kind of the beginning of it. And it was just kind of wild to think of that was where it started, the impetus of this shit. And I was just like, damn, it is really fucking wild to I guess be a part of some of these things that like are changing drastically for the state of the music industry, and just like, where is it going to go from here? But yeah, it was very weird that you brought that up, because I was just like enthralled in this, like, remember when YouTube like upset the entire world.
Yeah, I never realized that. I hadn't thought about it like that either. That is really interesting to think about. I mean, it's really interesting to think about like all these things, like even like Lars Ulrich with his Napster stuff back in the day, and me as a kid being like, screw this dude. And now years later, I'm like, sorry, Lars.
He was right.
You were right, dude. Like, it is kind of interesting to hindsight, you know, is 2020. And I just I don't know, that whole YouTube thing was definitely a trip, but it is interesting that, you know, it's brought us to this point of like having music be so accessible that it's really just already on your phone. If you have the app, you have all the music in the world.
Yeah.
You know, which I think is a cool thing. I like, you know, a lot of people have beef with like Spotify and things for the way that they pay, or, you know, the lack thereof of paying. But I'm just glad that music's being heard in mass. Like, that makes me happy. I'm not making records at this point in my life. I'm not making a record to get paid out from it. Like, the money is the last thing I'm thinking about. All I care about is that people get to hear me express myself through music. And like, that's what's really cool. That's the most badass part of doing all of this, is like, I don't even just mean like I thrive off of like the validation. It just makes me happy to know that people are hearing what I have to say, even just through, you know, the instrumental side of things. It's like, I think that's really a beautiful thing. And the fact that it's so easy for people to hear it. All I have to do is make it, upload it, and then it's at everybody's fingertips, and it's up to me to promote that. But that's kind of a radical like medium or way to plan releasing, is just like, everybody can have it. It's up to you to get it in their heads. And if you have a message, then you can let it be known and you can make it be heard. And, you know, I appreciate that accessibility. Like, the money is one thing. I don't agree with how little people get paid. I think it's a fight worth having, but I'm also not complaining at the same time. Like, I'm also grateful that it's so available to so many people. I think, you know, it's a healthy thing, and it's exposing more people to more music. You know, like, it costs less than ever to listen to music, and so people are enjoying music by and large, I think, in a huge way. People are listening to more artists. There are more artists there. It's just a different environment at this point in time. And so I think that, like, I don't know if the it's like what came first, the chicken or the egg? Like, I don't know if streaming has made it easier for there to be more bands that can succeed, or if, you know, having so many bands is what's making streaming awesome. But like, there's so many artists out there right now, and I think part of that is because it's so easy to have your music be out there. Like, there's so many people feeling ready to start a band because it doesn't take quite the same amount of energy to make sure that people are hearing it. Like back in the day when it was completely physical dependent, it was a big undertaking to make an album. And it's still a big undertaking, but like now you can make an album and you can trust that it will be somewhere for everybody to hear it. And that's like kind of a cool thing. Like, I think that's encouraging in a way. It's uplifting. It's kind of inspiring and exciting. Like, I know whatever I make will be somewhere where I can just send someone a link and they can hear it. They don't have to go buy a CD. They can just open their phone that sits in their pocket all day, and it's 2 clicks away and you're listening to my music. So thanks, you two.
Yeah.
Thanks, Bob.
This is a really weird question, the way I have to phrase it at first, but like, are you someone that enjoys reading books at all?
You know, I love reading books. It's been probably a year since I finished a book.
Okay.
But yes, I do enjoy reading.
So probably like 3-4 months ago, I went to the library and got a library card again, because I was like, you know, I'm going to try to make more of an effort to read books that don't cost me a bunch of money, because I have a pretty good memory for retention when I read something. So it's like, yeah, I can have the book, but when I'm done reading it, I probably will never go back and read it, because I'll just be like, I already know how.
Yeah, you got
goes.
it.
So I went to the library and I picked up this book, and it was called Once Upon a Time in Shaolin, The Untold Story of the Wu-Tang Clan's $1 Million Secret Album, The Devaluation of Music and America's New Public Enemy #1.
Oh, wow.
As title. Totally worth the read. Very interesting, because really the crux of the book, and this doesn't spoil anything, is the concept of devaluing music and how it happened, and why the Wu-Tang Clan, when they opted to make this record that went to the highest bidder, you know, they broke it down to like, why is art more valuable than the art of music? It's still art, it's still creation, it's still inspired by all these things. And they narrowed it down to the fact that when you buy a painting, when you go to a museum and you buy a painting, it's a one of one.
Yeah.
It's the exclusivity of this thing. When you now have, like, I have a copy of your record, somebody else has a phone, they have a copy of your record. It's not a one of one, it's a one of however infinite possibility. Yeah. So therefore, and the fact that people didn't have to do anything, like you said, I can send you a link, you can click on it, boom, now you got it. But also now I didn't have to do anything to get that album. I didn't have to spend time. I didn't have to really spend money. Like, it just is there. I have it. So it's kind of disposable because I can forget about it. And it was kind of breaking that down. And it was talking about, like, at least back in the day, like, you'd have to invest your own time of walking to a store, going, paying your actual cash, because like debit cards and shit didn't exist.
Right.
So like you had to kind of really plan out your trip to go buy this thing. And then, you know, you would sit with it. You would listen to it on the bus. You do all these things. And it really kind of broke down how they really realized that music has been devalued over the last 20, 30 years. And it was really interesting it was a very interesting read to see how they came to these conclusions, how they ultimately came to working on this record, putting the whole group together, because then it gets into the business side of things where it's like, well, if we sell this as a Wu-Tang record, then a Wu-Tang record has to be this, it has to live up to this benchmark. Now, instead of it just being this thing we're going to do and then secretly drop or whatever, now you got to talk about royalties and pub and all this kind of stuff. So then that gets a little interesting. And then even talking about, you know, they were like, okay, like, we got to put out some music. So they did this trip where they like put out like 3 different songs, or 3 different batches of songs, one at $5, I think one at 25 and a couple at 50. And they said within a couple of days, the $5 ones were leaked instantly. And they said as of when the writing happened, the other ones at 25 and 50 still hadn't been leaked anywhere, because people weren't willing to give away something that they spent a lot of what they deemed to spend a lot of money on to have this thing. And it was a really interesting read. I've been advocating a lot of people to read it because I just think it's a very interesting way to look at the music industry from people who were around at the beginning of hip hop being a viable commercial musical outlet, but then also how everyone has grown within, they're talking about the one guy who ended up producing it because the RZA wasn't going to produce it initially, but this dude had studied RZA so much that he could bring out kind of that classic Wu-Tang sound that the RZA maybe had grown too far beyond because of just him growing.
Right.
So it's just kind of this really interesting cross-section of a lot of things that I like to talk about on the show and that we've touched on here in our conversation over the last hour and a half, that I'm like, I think you would really enjoy this book. And then, even the person who bought the record at $1 million, obviously he was a fucking asshole and raising the prices up, pharmaceutical drugs and so forth for profit. But it was a very interesting read. I think it's only like 300 pages or something like that. It was a pretty fucking quick read. Tip for me, I read really quickly. But yeah, I see like it's on like Amazon and stuff like that. I don't know if it's on, I assume it's on Kindle and all that shit, but it's one of those that, like, based on our conversation, I'm like, I think you'd really enjoy this book. And I think I'll pros to you as we kind of wrap this up, because I feel like we've kind of hit on a lot of things for people to kind of break down.
Yeah.
That when the next record comes out, I'll give you that as homework. Like, try to get the book, read it, so then we can kind of maybe go down some of the other deeper rabbit holes I haven't been able to go down with anyone that touches on a lot of these things, because I just found it so infinitely fascinating. And I think it really has spurned a lot of the conversations that I've been having lately because of, like I said, the devaluation of music, the industry changing, people being a part of it. Like, just so many different facets of it are just, when you read it from someone who obviously has studied all of these different parts of it, and like they have the history where you can't be like, well, you're full of shit. And it's like, I'm not. So like, you just kind of have to be like, damn, it really fucking makes you think about shit in a different way. Not even just music, but just a lot of things in general that we put dollar signs on.
Yeah, I'm sure. I would love to read it. It sounds awesome. I'm probably going to order it right after we get off. I've been craving a good read lately, honestly. My brain needs something other than screens to stare at. So
yeah,
that sounds awesome.
That was why I found that. And then I still got to finish up my Dave Grohl book, but Chris from Ghost Inside told me when I had him on a while ago, he's like, yeah, it ends with him talking about Taylor. And I was like, I just can't bring myself to read it.
Yeah, that would be a tough one to kind of trudge through right now. It's a little too fresh, but I mean, those kinds of memoirs are really awesome and like really insightful. And I love when they come from people who are deeply ingrained in all of this, because they know they're living it and they're at a tier where they've lived through all of it. Like they've gone through every stage of being in a band, all the way up to being the biggest that a musical artist can be, or the most renowned that a musical artist can be. So like their insight is carries a lot of weight. So yeah, I'm very eager actually to read that. I'll do my homework, and then we can dive deeper into this discussion.
Yeah.
Next time.
To kind of end on a more positive thing, where can actually, I'm going to do a couple things with you. You're going to be the guinea pig for a new segment I want to start. So one of my podcast sponsors is Rockabilia. So like they do a bunch of band merch of all kinds of stuff. I've been really trying to figure out something unique to do for them that's like fun, like branded content. And during the pandemic, one of my good friends that tours, you may know him, Frank Finelli. They used to be in The World We Knew. And tours. Okay. So Frank got really big into the vintage t-shirt game. Mm-hmm. So watching his Instagram lives and shit, like now I've been like, oh my God, I had that shirt. I had 3 of them. They're selling them on your Instagram live for like $1,200 each. What the fuck? So I've really been kind of like getting back into like merch and paying attention to merch. And I used to work for a screen printing place that did a lot of higher end like mall stuff. And so I thought of this idea to do a segment for Rockabilia where it's discussing your favorite piece of merch. Like a favorite shirt that like maybe when you were a kid, you're like, man, I wore this fucking shirt out. Something to that effect. I'm still kind of playing around with it, but really, literally it just boils down to what is one of your favorite pieces of merch?
Dang. Probably I have some old Dimmu Borgir shirts.
Like what era of Dimmu are we talking? Like Death Called Armageddon? Or are we talking about like Stormblast and back then?
I mean, so like that's my favorite band of all time. So I've got pieces of merch from throughout their history. I've got a couple pieces of Stormblast merch. My favorite is probably it's like the Puritanical Euphoric Misanthropia album
cover.
And that's like the sickest piece of merch I own. I mean, it's just the album cover. It's a picture that anyone could see if you go to Spotify, but like having that to me is like, it's like cred. That's like the shirt I wear to the death metal show when I want people to know that I too like metal music and I'm not just a poser. But like, yeah, I would say my Dimmu collection and specifically my puritanical Euphoric Misanthropia shirts. Those are the sickest. I'm trying to think of some other pieces I've got. I've always been bad about collecting merch. Like when I was younger, I wish I bought more merch. I mean, like I would buy CDs and like, you know, a shirt here and there. I think I'm bad about keeping merch. Is I never, when I was growing up, realized how important it would be to me to have these things down the line. Like when I outgrow a shirt, I forget about the shirt or something, you know. And so there's a lot of pieces I've had throughout the years. But as far as what I've still got, it's the Dimmu stuff. And then I've got like a couple old like Lamb of God shirts from back in the day too that are like, I don't wear them. They're too small. This is back when I was like and
your MySpace days.
Yeah, like when I could find when I wore the skinniest clothing I could possibly find. But yeah, I would say that. But we're going with the Dimmu. That's number one.
So speaking of Dimmu, one of my favorite CDs I had, and if I felt like going to dig it out, I would go find it. Around the same time, Puritanical coming out, I went to Best Buy, and they had, back when they were getting import CDs more frequently, and they had a Live in Torment is the record.
Okay.
And it's shaped like a skull. Let me see if I can pull this up just for those that will have never, ever seen this. This thing is, oh yeah, it pulls up right away. This thing is fucking wild. Let me copy this link. And I remember just seeing it because like it didn't have a sleeve, it didn't have like any of that shit. It just literally was this weird album thing. And I just remember being like, huh, okay, like it's just this weird fucking CD thing. This is literally it. This is the CD.
Oh, that's sick. Yeah.
Like it it's like cut out and like right where I'm circling this thing like you can see it. The like nose is like where the CD, like the part where you would put it in the CD tray. Right. That's what it looks like. And it had like the fastest live version of not Blessings of Prone, the Throne of Tyranny. What was track 6? The big one, Puritania? Was that the big like the down like that big track everyone? Yeah. It had like the fastest version of that I've ever heard. And just like it's like 6 songs, but like the CD itself, like people look at it and like, what the fuck? Like you hold it and it's only like this big. And people are just like, what the fuck is that? I go, it's a Dimmu live record. And they're just like, does it work? I'm like, yeah, it works.
Actually spin
but like
around?
It spins around, but like after a while, like certain CD players just wouldn't play it because it's not a full disc. So like the laser reader that has to read it, like it's hard for it to read because it's not a full circle.
Yeah, not circular.
But I've always wanted them to release it on vinyl like that because I think it would just be a great picture disc, even though I hate picture discs. But it's one of the coolest things I own, and it's a totally weird thing because a lot of people, I feel like Dimmu is one of those bands like either like them or you don't. Because I think a lot of people are like, oh, well, of course that's the band you like, and it's like, what? They're fucking good. I'm sorry.
They're the best band of all time.
And I mean, at that point, when I got into him, Nick Barker was in the band, like he had just left Cradle. Yes. So it's like, dude, like I'll watch videos of them playing. I don't remember what festival it was back in like 2003 or 4 or somewhere around there. And Nick Barker's just like, sorry, I'm kind of body shaming, but I just used to be so enthralled with the fact that like this dude looks like he weighs 300 pounds, is wearing all this like fucking gauntlets and like leather. And I'm like, how are you that fast, but you're that big?
Yeah. I remember being absolutely blown away by that when I was a kid. I was like, dude, it does not matter. This dude can shred. Nothing's stopping him. He's just an absolute unit, and he's still legendary. But like,
Dude, absolutely.
yeah, I remember having the same reaction. I was like, wow,
Yeah.
this guy is defying the odds. Like he's a big dude, but he is like scorching this performance.
That's how I felt about all of those dudes. I mean, like Galder always kind of was like intimidating as shit. Like I remember like looking at the booklet of that album and just like looking at all those dudes because it really was one of the first like true like I guess death metal kind of symphonic death metal, whatever you want to call it, records I'd ever bought. And I was like, this shit just sounds sinister. Like, I mean, the way it starts off, it sounds like some Lord of the Rings shit. And then here comes Blessings Upon the Throne of Tyranny, just like blast beats going everywhere. And you're like, man, what the fuck? And then like some of the weird like strings and arrangements like are just scary as fuck. Like,
yeah,
it's a wild fucking record. And then to go backwards and listen to the other stuff, because I kind of felt Death Cult Armageddon lacked in the production for me. Like it sounded like it was mixed like from afar. Like you listen to it, and it just doesn't sound like it's as like beefy as like the record before it. And it's like I don't know why that one sounds so good. And the next one that I, in theory, had more production. Like the best way I could describe it is like go look on YouTube and go look up. I can't remember the single that's off of Death Called Armageddon. But when you listen to it, the video is in like 240p, and it sounds like shit. And then like if you expect the song to not sound like that, it sounds like somehow it was mixed in 240p. Is the only way I've ever really been able to describe that record.
I love
it.
That.
Just sounds terrible. Like it needs a re-record or something.
Black metal is always a gamble with the production quality. You never know.
That's why I don't like it most of the time, because a lot of people give me shit for not liking music that sounds like shit, and I go, the technology is there. It's almost like a point of pride. Like you can, like make it sound good. Like I'm sorry, like I know bands have to start somewhere, but it's like when your whole catalog is like sounds like it was recorded on a 1 mic basement recording on a 4-track. It's like, dude, you can do better. I promise you can.
I've always just chalked it up to different strokes. Like some people can't listen to an overproduced album, you know, like some people need that rough and tough. But I'm similar to you where I appreciate a great sounding album. I think that's what got me into Dimmu was like I was listening to black metal and I was like, this all sounds kind of tinny and rough. And then I heard Dimmu and I was like, wow, these guys are the first black metal band I've heard that at the time that was like really investing in production quality and like making things sound awesome. And it was like not going for that rough sound. And like you can't really have all that symphonic stuff and like you have to polish it. If you're going to have that much going on in your music, it's got to be polished and it's got to be refined. But like, you know, I had a similar reaction. I was just like, wow, these guys hit the spot. I was a kid and then somehow even as a kid, I gave a shit about like mixed quality, but like, I was just like, wow, yeah, Dimmu's doing it. They're doing it right. And like, it sounds unlike any other, like, this is what's getting me into black metal. I mean, you know, it's a little bit, people kind of argue on the black metal thing with Dimmu, but like, you know, symphonic black metal, this is my gateway into it.
Yeah. And
because it sounds so good, it just was more accessible to a broader group of people.
Yeah.
So good on them.
Yeah. Yeah. What a great record. I'm going to go listen to that now. Now that we're done. I haven't thought about that, but it's like a shitty gray day. And I'm like, yeah, that would probably fit the vibe of today. Like, scenically outside. But yeah. Lastly, where can everyone find you or whatever you would like to plug online?
Well, as we've been talking about, we have 2 new albums coming out. Suffer in Hell is out November 11th, coming up shortly. And well, I don't know if this will be out by then, but
it'll probably be shortly after it comes out.
Okay, so check out Suffer in Hell, our new album. And then Suffer in Heaven is out March 17th. These are streaming everywhere. We've got lots of music videos out. We've got lots of touring coming up. We're just basically going to be everywhere. So if you live on Earth and you want to catch our band, then you'll probably have a chance to in the next year. But yeah, I just I appreciate everybody listening and like taking the time to check out our band. We've been around a long time, but we're still kicking. We're still grinding away, and we just really appreciate everyone giving us the opportunity to still be doing this. And I hope you guys love the new records, and we just gave it our all. So please listen, and please don't forget about us. You know, if it's a couple months between our two records, we still exist. We haven't vanished. So yeah.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for taking the time. It was a pleasure getting to chat with you for today, and looking forward to the next record and the next chat.
Hell yeah. Well, thanks so much for having me. I really appreciate you.
So that was my conversation with Steven of Chelsea Grin. Again, they have not one, but two records coming out. One will be out by the time you will hear this, and the second one will be out in the beginning of next year. Really want to thank him for taking the time and really just kind of going down all kinds of rabbit holes. You know, I mean, I think one of the bigger ones that I really have been thinking about a lot since we had this conversation was talking about the role of producers in metal, and talking about how the likes of the Ross Robinsons, the Terry Dates, even it's not metal, but, the Mutt Langs and a lot of the super producers who really put their sound and their thumbprint on a style of music for so long. I mean, you could even say Bob Rock for, 90s rock, late 80s, early 90s rock music. And it's just one of those things where I still really don't know, even thinking about it for a week or so after doing this chat, I'm still not entirely sure if it's helped or hindered a scene necessarily, because I feel like it definitely makes bands want to go to that person because of the sounds that they're able to produce on a record and how their records sound. But does that make every band that goes to that producer just another band that sounds like that style? Like Adam D, I don't think makes every band sound like Killswitch, but I think what he's able to do is what makes Killswitch successful is focusing on songwriting, focusing on some of the studio tricks that he does to make better songs, to make better parts more memorable, while also still sounding really good. I don't think that hinders, 2000s metalcore at all, but it is one of those things where I do wonder if everyone goes to him or goes to like a Ross Robinson or whatever because of what they think it's going to do for them. And that's where I don't know. Because like I said, even in the chat, you look at someone like Steve Ebbets with what he has done with Dillinger Escape Plan, and they sounded like not really anyone else kind of at the time. And so to keep going back to Ebbets, it felt like just a continuation of what the band was able to do, and they basically had that other member of the band that was able to navigate these new things, new ways of making this music. And I think sometimes it takes having that person who you feel so comfortable with to be able to push you in new, exciting ways and kind of get out of your own comfort zones. But I also do feel like potentially that's where having a new producer working with you might actually get the same results, because then you're not stagnating with the same person who might just go, I know you guys like to do this. This is how you work. So I don't know. It's really interesting to kind of start boiling that down and kind of still really coming to the same conclusion that I did earlier, which is just like, I don't know if it's good or bad. I think it just is. And it's an interesting way to kind of look at eras of music through the lens of the big producers who were really making their marks known on the respective genres under rock, metal, heavy metal, whatever. It's really interesting. It's a really interesting thought, and I'm really thankful that Steven decided to kind of go there with me, and using it through the lens of what Chelsea Grin has done since he's been in the band, and how he feels about it as an artist, and a producer. So to me, that was a really interesting idea and a concept kind of that I guess I'd kind of stumbled across and really been thinking about since then. But to start wrapping up this episode, because it obviously was long enough, if you would like to keep up with Chelsea Grin, you can find them on Facebook at Chelsea Grin Metal, Instagram at Chelsea Grin Official, and Twitter at Chelsea Grin UT, or just go to chelseagrinband.com for all of your updates and news. If you'd like to keep up with Steven, you can find him on Instagram at Twitter at SpeevGrin. That's SPEAVE Grin. Should be pretty easy. It's in the show notes, so if you can't spell that and don't understand it, look below, and there it is. If you'd like to keep up with the podcast, you can find us simple enough, Bruce Speak Pod on all the socials. If you'd like to support us monetarily, you can go to patreon.com/Bruce Speak Pod, get all the episodes way before they even come out. And there's a lot of bonus content over there, podcast episodes that I've never released on the main feed and will never release on the main feed. I think there's about 8 or 9 of those at least, plus some other secondary podcast segments and so forth that are over there. So lots of content over there. So working on new stuff. Obviously, you've heard of the new segments that have been rolling out, the Beer Minute, thanks to Starving Artist. And with this one, you also got to hear the rollout of my favorite piece of merch. Wanted to do something fun for Rockabilia. And I mean, who doesn't have a great piece of merch, and who doesn't have favorite memories of merch in general that you bought from shows, or, you know, a shirt that you wore out after going to a certain tour? But like I said, a friend of mine does the vintage t-shirt selling stuff. And a lot of times I see band merch that I used to have. And when you see it go on these auctions for $500, $600, $700, $800,000, and you're like, fuck, man, I had like 2 or 3 of those. It definitely gets you waxing nostalgic about merch. And it's still something that I love doing. I love buying new shirts. I love going to shows and buying merch. So I think it's a really fun segment to do with our sponsors, who I want to thank and always put the shine on for supporting the show. You already heard me talk about Starving Artists with the Beer Minute. You heard me just talk about Rockabilia. Use our code Brutally at checkout. Take 10% off your total purchase order. So I want to thank them for supporting us. Support them if you can. And for the Brutally Speaking podcast, I am John, and I will talk to you all next time with Jake from August Burns Red. That was a really deep, informative chat. Can't wait to get that one out to you all.